I had always believed in the promises he made, the vows we exchanged, and the life we'd built together. He was my everything, at least that's what I thought. When we were young, he promised me that he would take care of me for life, that I would never have to worry about a thing. His words felt like a shield, something I could always lean on. For years, I poured myself into our marriage, supporting him through thick and thin, putting my career aside to help him climb the ladder. I was there through the late nights, the early mornings, and the constant grind. Our life together felt secure, like nothing could ever tear us apart. But that all changed the day I lost my job. It wasn't something I expected. One day, I walked into the office and was called into a meeting with HR. The company was downsizing, and I, along with so many others, was let go. I felt the ground slip from beneath me, my whole world tilting. I had worked there for over 2 decades, and now, just like that, I was out. I remember sitting in the car afterward, staring at the contract they handed me, the severance pay they offered me, and feeling nothing but emptiness. I thought of all the years I spent working, thinking it was all for us, for our future, and now it was over. I came home that day expecting support, expecting him to hold me and say, "It's okay, we'll get through this together." But instead, I found a cold silence. The moment I told him, his face hardened, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Disappointment. He didn't hug me, didn't comfort me. Instead, he looked at me with a strange kind of anger. "What are we going to do now?" he asked, his voice sharp. "What about all the bills? The house? Your job was the one keeping us afloat. You were supposed to handle this. How could you be so irresponsible?" His words hit me like a slap. I tried to explain, to tell him that I had no control over it, but he wasn't listening. "You've been a burden for too long," he said. "Maybe it's time you figured it out on your own." Those words echoed in my mind, louder than any apology he could have given. I had given him everything, my time, my energy, my love, and this was how he repaid me, with a simple, cold dismissal. That was the moment I knew something had changed. He wasn't the man I thought he was. The promises he made, the vows we took, none of it meant anything anymore. I wasn't just facing a job loss, I was facing the end of everything I thought was secure, and just like that, I realized I was alone. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was staring at the abyss, unsure of what to do next. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't rely on him anymore. I couldn't keep living in a relationship where I was nothing more than a shadow, a burden. And that was when I started thinking, maybe it was time to stop depending on him entirely. Maybe it was time to build a new life, one where I didn't need to lean on anyone else for survival. Little did I know the journey ahead would test me in ways I never imagined. The days that followed were a blur. I spent hours each morning searching for new jobs, applying to anything I thought might work, but nothing seemed to come through. It was as if the world had forgotten me. The longer I went without success, the more the weight of my situation crushed me. My savings were running low, and I was starting to wonder how long I could keep this up. But what hit hardest was the quiet. The house, once filled with his presence, now felt like a mausoleum. We hardly spoke. When I finally came to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to find another job right away, I decided to sit down and have a serious conversation with him. Maybe he had been angry before, but I thought surely he'd come around. Surely he would see that this wasn't my fault. But when I walked into the living room that evening, I was met with a look that made my stomach drop. He was sitting on the couch, eyes glued to his phone. He didn't even acknowledge me when I spoke. "We need to talk," I said softly, but he just grunted, not even looking up. I felt like a stranger in my own home. "About what?" he finally asked, his voice flat. "About how you've lost your job?" He didn't say it in a supportive way. It was like a reminder of my failure. "You don't think we have enough problems already? This isn't the time for your emotions." The words were like daggers. The person I had trusted most in the world now looked at me with contempt. He didn't care about the long nights I'd spent helping him build our life. about all the sacrifices I had made. It was all irrelevant now because I was no longer useful to him. The man who had once promised to take care of me had turned into a stranger who saw me as nothing but a liability. I tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. "You promised," I whispered, hoping for some glimmer of empathy. His gaze finally lifted from the screen, his face hardening. "I did, and I meant it, but you can't even take care of yourself now. What am I supposed to do? We have bills to pay. You should have been more careful with your career." I was stunned. Those words hit me with such force that I couldn't breathe. How could he say something like that? After everything we had been through together, he was blaming me for losing my job, as if it was a choice. "I thought we were in this together," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I thought we were a team." His lips curled into a tight smile, one that wasn't even remotely kind. "Not anymore," he said, his voice cold. "You're on your own now." I didn't know how to respond. I felt a flood of emotions: shock, hurt, anger, but mostly a deep, profound sadness. This was the man I had built my life with, and now I was nothing to him. He had turned his back on me when I needed him most, and I didn't even recognize the person sitting in front of me anymore. That night, I went to bed with a heavy heart, but as I lay there in the dark, a strange thought started to form in my mind. He had given up on me, but what if I didn't give up on myself? What if, for the first time in my life, I relied only on me? It was a terrifying thought, but it was also freeing. I didn't have any answers yet, but I knew one thing. I was done being the woman who just followed. It was time to take control, even if I had to do it alone. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty. I walked around the house doing the things I had always done, but everything felt different. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, reminding me of all the promises that had been broken. The house, once a symbol of stability, now felt like a prison. My husband barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was cold, distant. I could no longer ignore the truth that had been staring me in the face. He was done with me. He didn't care about my job loss. He didn't care about the sacrifices I had made. All he cared about was his own comfort, his own needs, and I had ceased to be useful to him. It was in those quiet moments, alone with my thoughts, that the reality began to settle in. I wasn't just facing a job loss. I was facing the collapse of my entire life. The foundation I had built everything on was crumbling beneath me, and I was powerless to stop it. My trust in him, my belief that we were a team, shattered in an instant. He had promised me security, but now I was out in the cold with nothing. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at the bills piling up, I made a decision. I would not let this be the end of me. I wasn't going to let my life end in this miserable, broken state. For the first time in years, I began to think about what I wanted, what I truly needed. I wasn't going to wait for him to come around. I wasn't going to beg him for help. I had to take matters into my own hands. I began by searching for ways to get back on my feet. I dusted off my old resume and started applying for jobs, but I knew the odds weren't in my favor. I was older now, and the job market had changed, but still, I didn't give up. I called every connection I could think of, asking for leads, for opportunities. The days stretched on, and each rejection stung, but I refused to let it break me. In the meantime, I noticed him getting more and more distant. He was still there, physically, but he had become a stranger. He would leave the house for hours, sometimes for entire days, giving me no explanation. I knew deep down that he was looking for a way out of this marriage. Maybe he had already checked out emotionally, but now it was just a matter of time before he would walk away entirely. I could feel it in the silence, in the coldness between us. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the weight of everything pressing down on me, I realized I had to face something else, something I had been avoiding. I had to face the truth about myself. All these years, I had been so focused on making him happy, on making our life work, that I had forgotten who I was. I had forgotten what I was capable of. I had sacrificed my own dreams, my own aspirations, all for him and our marriage. But what had it gotten me? A broken promise, a man who no longer cared. I had been living for someone else for so long that I no longer knew how to live for myself. But that was about to change. I had spent too many years trying to hold on to something that wasn't real. Now it was time to let go. I didn't know what my future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. Maybe it wasn't too late to start over. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild a life on my own without relying on anyone else's promises. And so, I made a vow to myself that night. I would never let anyone make me feel small again. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to thrive. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but I would find a way. I wasn't going to let this heartbreak define me. I was going to redefine myself, and I was going to do it on my own terms. As the days turned into weeks, I slowly began to rebuild my life. The first step was letting go of the fear that had held me back for so long. Every time I thought about my husband's betrayal, the way he had tossed me aside, it was like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. But I knew I couldn't let it crush me. I refused to let him have that power over me any longer. He had already taken enough from me. I started taking small steps toward regaining control of my life. I sold some of the things I didn't need, old furniture, clothes I hadn't worn in years, and put the money toward my first goal, getting out of the house. It was becoming impossible to live under the same roof as someone who had shown me nothing but indifference and resentment. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was the emotional prison I had been living in. I needed to be free. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, away from everything that reminded me of him. The thought of leaving the house we had shared for so long was both terrifying and exhilarating. It felt like I was stepping into an unknown future, one where I had to rely solely on myself. But in some strange way, it also felt like a new beginning, a chance to reclaim my life, my independence, and my sense of self. The move wasn't easy. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. The apartment was smaller than what I was used to, and it didn't have the comforts I had grown accustomed to over the years. But it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for me. I wasn't just surviving, I was actively creating a life for myself, free from the toxic grip of my past. With my new space, I felt a small sense of peace. I decorated the apartment with the few things I had left, trying to make it feel like home. I spent time reading, something I hadn't done in years. I started exploring the city, walking to local parks, enjoying the simple pleasures of being on my own. There were still moments of doubt, times when the loneliness would creep in, and I'd find myself wishing things had turned out differently. But every time that happened, I reminded myself of how far I'd come, how strong I was becoming. I wasn't the same person I was before, the one who relied on my husband's promises. I was learning to trust myself, to believe in my own strength. But even with all this progress, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't completely let go of me. He was still in the back of my mind, always lurking, a constant reminder of the life I had lost. And then, one day, I received a call. It was from him. I stared at the phone for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue with my new life without him, but another part of me was curious. What did he want? After everything, why was he calling me now? I answered, my voice steady but cautious. Hello? There was a long pause before he spoke. I've been thinking about you, he said, his voice surprisingly soft. I've made a mistake. I was wrong to push you away like that. I want to fix things. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, disbelief, but also something I couldn't quite identify. Could it be guilt? Was he finally feeling the weight of what he had done? I don't know what you want from me, I replied, my voice cold. You left me when I needed you most. You broke your promise. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the regret in his voice when he finally spoke. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to handle everything, but I'm ready to try again if you'll let me. I couldn't believe it. After everything, he was asking for another chance? Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to hope that things could go back to the way they were, but I knew better now. I had been through too much to go back to that life, to let him back into my heart so easily. I don't think I can, I said, my voice stronger than it had ever been. I've spent my whole life trying to make things work with you, but I've realized something. I don't need you. I'm better off without you. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I knew it was hard for him to hear, but it was the truth. I didn't need his promises anymore. I didn't need him to define who I was. I was finally learning to define myself. Without another word, I hung up the phone. I had made my decision, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was mine, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into my new routine. I found a part-time job at a local cafe. Something simple, but it gave me a sense of purpose. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And most importantly, it was mine. Every day I felt a little stronger, a little more in control. I woke up in the mornings without the nagging fear that I was failing. For the first time in so many years, I was doing something for myself, something that didn't involve taking care of him or carrying the weight of his promises. But there were moments, quiet moments, when the weight of the past would creep in, when the loneliness would seep in, and I would feel the sting of abandonment all over again. It was in those moments that I would remember how empty his promises were. I could hear his voice in my head, telling me that I was nothing without him. But now, every time I thought of him, I only felt a sense of relief. I was free, free from the constant anxiety, free from the feeling that I was never enough. One afternoon, while I was working at the cafe, I saw a familiar face walk in. My heart skipped a beat. It was him. He was standing at the counter, looking around as if he was searching for something or someone. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to hide from him, to pretend I hadn't seen him. But another part of me, the stronger part, knew I couldn't keep running from him. He had already taken enough from me. I wasn't going to let him have any more control over my life. I took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rush of emotions flooding me. He looked at me, surprised, like he hadn't expected me to be here. His face softened, and for a brief moment I saw the man I had once loved, but that feeling quickly faded, replaced by something colder. I I didn't expect to see you here," he said quietly. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I know I messed up. I'm sorry, really. Can we talk? I want to fix things. I miss you." I felt a strange lump in my throat. For a moment, I was that woman again, the one who had believed in him, who had trusted him completely. But I shook that feeling away. He had already shown me who he truly was, and I couldn't go back. "No," I said, my voice firm, though my heart ached. "I don't think we have anything left to say." He looked hurt, but I didn't flinch. The man I had loved was gone. This man standing before me, asking for forgiveness, was a stranger. I wasn't the same woman who had once believed in him. I had learned the hard way that promises meant nothing if they were never kept. "Please," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I've made so many mistakes. I don't want to lose you. I still care about you." I looked at him for a long moment, weighing his words, but nothing he could say would change the truth. "You already lost me," I replied softly, "and I don't think you can ever get me back." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions, and for a brief moment I felt a pang of sorrow. But it was fleeting. I had to remind myself of all the years I had spent in that relationship, waiting for a love that wasn't truly there. I turned away, walking back to the counter, leaving him standing there, his face twisted with regret and confusion. I didn't look back, not because I didn't care, but because I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. My future was mine now, and I wasn't going to let him take that from me again. I had already started rebuilding my life, one step at a time. I wasn't going to let him tear that down. As I wiped down the counter, a small sense of peace settled in. I was no longer that woman who relied on empty promises. I was stronger now, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally living for myself. The days after that encounter with him passed in a strange kind of quiet. I could still feel his presence lingering, his words echoing in my mind, but I pushed them away. I had come too far to let him back in, and yet, as I went about my daily life, a nagging question kept resurfacing. Was I truly better off without him? It wasn't an easy question to answer. For years, he had been the center of my world. I had dedicated myself to our life together, sacrificing so much for him, for us. And now, here I was, on my own, trying to figure out who I was without him. Some days it felt like I was standing on shaky ground, unsure of where to step next. But other days I felt a quiet strength that I hadn't known I had before. I started focusing more on myself, things I had pushed aside for years. I began taking yoga classes, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. It was small, but it was mine. It was the first step in learning to enjoy my own company again, in finding peace in the stillness. The more I practiced, the more I found a sense of balance in my life. I could breathe easier. I could feel myself coming back to life in ways I hadn't imagined possible. But as I got more comfortable in my new life, the world outside seemed to be moving on without me. The cafe job, though fulfilling in its own way, didn't pay enough to cover all my expenses. The reality of living on my own, of building a life from scratch, was harder than I had anticipated. I started making phone calls, trying to find other ways to supplement my income. I considered getting a second job, but the idea of overworking myself again, of being constantly tired and drained, was something I didn't want to repeat. I reached out to a few old friends from the past, those I had lost touch with over the years while I was so focused on him. To my surprise, they were eager to reconnect. I met with one of them, Sarah, for coffee one afternoon. She had always been the free spirit, the one who lived life on her own terms. As we talked about everything that had happened, she listened without judgment. "You're not the same person you were before," she said after a long pause. "You're stronger. You've been through so much, but look at you. You're still standing. You've got more fight in you than you realize." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had never thought of myself that way. In my mind, I was still the woman who had been discarded, the one who had been left behind. But Sarah saw something different. She saw someone who had the potential to move forward, to rebuild, to be more than just a victim of circumstances. "You should think about what you really want," Sarah continued, a knowing look in her eyes. "Don't let the past hold you back. You've got a chance now, a real one. Take it." That conversation lingered with me for days. What did I really want? I had spent so much of my life living for someone else, doing what I thought was expected of me. But now I had the freedom to make my own choices, to build a life that was mine and mine alone. The possibilities were endless, but at the same time, terrifying. I was standing on the edge of something new, and I didn't know where it would lead. But one thing became clear to me. I wasn't going to let fear stop me from living my life. I had spent so long being afraid of change, afraid of being alone, But now I realized that being alone didn't have to mean being powerless. I had already proven that I could survive, and now I was ready to thrive. A few days later, I took another step toward my future. I enrolled in a small business course at the local community college. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I had always been good with numbers, good at organizing, and I realized that maybe I could turn those skills into something more. Maybe I could start my own small business. The thought of it was exciting and overwhelming at the same time, but it felt right. It was something I could build on my own, something that didn't depend on anyone else. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I didn't know where this new path would take me, but I was determined to find out, and for the first time in years, I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. Weeks passed, and with each one, I felt myself slowly shedding the remnants of my old life. The pain of betrayal, while not gone, became easier to manage. The more I focused on my personal growth and my goals, the less room there was for him in my thoughts. I was learning to embrace the quiet, to appreciate the stillness that once felt so suffocating. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was starting to live. The business course I had enrolled in was a revelation. It was challenging, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of excitement. I had always dreamed of being independent, of doing something for myself. But back then, I had never given myself the chance. Now, with a small sense of confidence slowly building, I found myself imagining a future where I didn't have to rely on anyone. The idea of building something from the ground up, something that was entirely mine, filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't easy, though. Balancing work, school, and the emotional baggage I was still carrying was exhausting. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in responsibilities. The pressure sometimes felt overwhelming, but I reminded myself of why I was doing this. I wasn't just working to make ends meet. I was working to reclaim my life, to create something that was all mine. But even as I focused on building this new life, there were moments when he would slip into my thoughts. His voice, that pleading tone, would echo in my mind. I would remember how he had begged me for another chance, and for a split second, I would wonder if I had made the right choice. What if things could have been different? What if I had forgiven him and tried to rebuild our marriage? But then the reality of everything he had done would hit me. His promises had meant nothing, his apologies were empty, and he had never truly valued me. I couldn't ignore that. One day, as I was walking home from class, I saw him again. He was standing by the cafe, looking out of place in his suit, holding a bouquet of flowers. When he saw me, his face lit up, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, my pace steady, but my heart pounding in my chest. He called out my name, and I felt a brief, almost involuntary urge to turn around, but I didn't. I wasn't that woman anymore. "Margaret!" he shouted, a desperate edge in his voice. "Please, just let me explain." I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I simply walked faster, pushing my feelings down, knowing I had to keep moving forward, knowing that turning back wasn't an option. When I got home, I threw myself into my work. The distraction of studying, of learning something new, kept me from thinking about him for the rest of the day. But at night, when everything was quiet, the loneliness crept in. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake. I didn't regret leaving him, not really. But sometimes I missed the comfort of having someone to share my life with. The idea of being truly alone forever was a hard pill to swallow. But then I would remind myself of everything I had already done. I had left him behind. I had taken control of my life. The loneliness wasn't as painful as it once had been. It was just a feeling, and feelings didn't have to control me. I was in charge of my life now, not him. And that realization gave me the strength to keep going. Then, something unexpected happened. One morning, as I walked into the cafe where I worked, I noticed a new face. He was sitting at the counter, sipping his coffee, and he smiled at me when I walked by. It wasn't the smile of someone who was trying to get my attention. It was just a friendly, warm smile, but there was something about him that caught my eye. His name was Paul, and he had been coming to the cafe for a while, always on the same morning shift. He was kind, quiet, and easy to talk to. It wasn't long before we started chatting during my breaks. He wasn't pushy or flirtatious, just genuine. He shared stories about his life, his work, and his own journey. The more we talked, the more I realized how much I appreciated his company. It was strange, this feeling of connection. For so long, I had closed myself off, convinced that no one would ever make me feel the way I once did. But Paul was different. He didn't make me feel like I had to prove anything. He made me feel heard, seen, and respected. As the weeks went by, our conversations became more frequent. We began to spend time together outside of the cafe. He took me to a small art gallery one afternoon, something I had always wanted to do but had never made the time for. It wasn't romantic, not at first. It was just two people getting to know each other. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was beginning to feel something again. Something I hadn't felt in so long. Hope. I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship, but for the first time, I was allowing myself to believe that maybe there was more out there for me. Maybe, just maybe, I could open my heart again. But this time it would be on my terms, with someone who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. As I sat with Paul in that quiet cafe one evening, sipping my tea, I realized that while the past would always be a part of me, it no longer had the power to define me. I wasn't the woman who had relied on promises that were never kept. I wasn't the woman who had been abandoned. I was someone new, someone who had fought for herself, who had found her strength, and who was finally beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, happiness was still within reach. The days with Paul were simple but meaningful. We shared quiet afternoons in the park, sat together at the local bookstore, and talked about everything and nothing at all. He was kind and patient, never pushing me beyond what I was ready for. He didn't expect anything from me. He wasn't trying to fix me or save me. He just let me be, and that was exactly what I needed. It felt good to laugh again, to have someone who wasn't tied to the past, someone who didn't know the story of my heartbreak and betrayal. With Paul, I could be someone new, someone who wasn't defined by the woman who had once been abandoned by her husband. He didn't see me as a victim. He saw me as I was now, strong, independent, and capable of moving forward. But as much as I enjoyed the time we spent together, a part of me still wasn't ready to let go completely. My old wounds hadn't healed, and even though Paul didn't make me feel pressured to move faster, I could sense the hesitation in myself. There were nights when I would lie awake, thinking about my past, about the life I had with my husband, and I would wonder if I had made the right choice in walking away. I still missed the idea of a family, of someone to share my life with. One evening, I found myself sitting on the couch in my small apartment, feeling the weight of it all. I was in a better place than I had been months ago, but I still had moments when I felt alone, lost in my own thoughts. The memories of the pain, the harsh words, the betrayal, it all came flooding back. I had spent so many years trying to make everything work, trying to fix something that was never really mine to fix. I thought about Paul and how much he had come to mean to me, but I couldn't help but wonder if I was holding myself back, afraid of letting him in completely. Was I afraid of getting hurt again? Or was I just scared of truly opening myself up to someone after all the years of closing myself off? The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was my ex-husband. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail, but for some reason, I found myself picking up the phone. "Margaret." His voice sounded strained, like he wasn't sure what to say. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything that happened, about us." I clenched my fist. the emotions swirling inside me. I hadn't expected this call, and I didn't know how to feel about it. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice more composed than I felt. I don't know how to say this, but I want to apologize," he said, his voice soft. "I know I hurt you, and I never should have pushed you away like that." I felt a knot in my chest. His words were sincere, but they were too little, too late. "You've already done that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've hurt me more than I can ever express, but I've moved on. I've learned that I don't need you. I never did." There was a long silence on the other end, and I could almost hear him processing my words. "I understand," he said finally, "but I'm sorry. I hope one day you can forgive me." I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. "I've forgiven you, not for you, but for me. I needed to let go, to stop holding on to a life that was never meant for me, and now I'm free." The conversation ended soon after that, and as I put the phone down, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time, I felt no anger, no regret, only relief. I had let go of the past, and with that, I had let go of him. His apology didn't change anything, and I didn't need it to. I had already forgiven him in my heart. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything I had been through. How far I had come from that broken woman who once thought her world had ended. I wasn't that person anymore. I had fought my way back from the brink, and now I was building a life that was mine. Paul hadn't come around that night, but I could feel his presence in my life, even from a distance. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of it. Whatever happened, I knew I could handle it. I had already survived the hardest part. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that I was finally living for myself. I had reclaimed my power, my dignity, and my future. And no matter what happened, I would never allow anyone to take that away from me again. As the days passed, I grew more comfortable with the idea of moving forward. My life, though not perfect, was beginning to feel like my own again. I was slowly letting go of the baggage from my past, even if it was hard at times. There were still moments when the loneliness crept in, and I would feel a pang of regret or sadness, but they were becoming fewer and farther between. I was learning to appreciate the quiet moments, to find peace in my own company, and to savor the small victories, like getting through an entire day without thinking of him, or having a productive meeting with a potential business partner. But even as I grew stronger, I couldn't help but wonder if I was truly ready for the future, or if I was just trying to fill the empty spaces in my heart with distractions. I'd been hurt before, and I wasn't sure I was ready to open myself up to someone again. Paul had been kind and patient, never rushing me, but I couldn't deny the fear I felt. What if I allowed myself to care again, only to be let down once more? One evening, as I was getting ready to meet Paul for dinner, I took a long look at myself in the mirror. I was 60 now, no longer a young woman, but not quite old either. I had lived a full life, one full of love, loss, sacrifice, and growth. And yet, there was still so much I hadn't experienced, so much I still wanted to do. My reflection stared back at me, older but stronger. I had been through the worst, and I was still standing. Maybe that was the greatest victory of all. That night, Paul and I met at the little bistro we'd discovered a few weeks ago. We sat down at our usual table, and I noticed that something had changed. The awkwardness that had been there when we first started talking had disappeared. It was easy to be with him, to just be present, to enjoy the moment. We didn't talk about the past, and we didn't talk about the future. We just shared a meal and enjoyed each other's company, something simple but meaningful. At some point during dinner, Paul reached across the table and gently took my hand. I looked up at him, startled, but he only smiled softly, a calm warmth in his eyes. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I know you've been through a lot, and I know it hasn't been easy. But I just want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to be with you in whatever way you need." His words were simple, but they hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much of my life trying to make others happy, trying to fill the voids in my own heart by giving to others. But Paul wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't trying to change me or make me someone I wasn't. He was just offering his support, his kindness, without any strings attached. For the first time in a long while, I felt something stir in my chest. Not fear, not doubt, but something warmer. It was hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could open myself up to him. Maybe, just maybe, I could let go of the past and allow myself to trust again. "I don't know what the future holds," I said quietly, my voice soft but steady, "but I'm willing to see where it goes, with you." Paul's smile widened and he squeezed my hand gently. It wasn't a grand declaration or an over-the-top gesture. It was just a simple, honest moment. And it felt right. The rest of the evening passed in a comfortable silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, but content in the presence of the other. As I left the bistro and stepped out into the cool evening air, I realized that I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of the future, and I wasn't afraid of getting hurt again. I had learned to trust myself, and in that trust, I had found strength. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something beautiful, and something that was entirely mine. Whatever it was, I was ready to face it with an open heart. I had come so far, and the road ahead was mine to walk, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living again. As the weeks passed, the relationship with Paul deepened, though slowly. There were no rushes, no expectations, only quiet moments shared between us, and that's how I liked it. It was different from anything I had experienced before. There was no pressure to be someone I wasn't, no need to prove myself. We were two people simply existing together, finding comfort in the smallest things: morning coffee, a shared laugh, the simple act of being present with each other. I had never thought that life could be so peaceful after everything I'd been through. It wasn't that I had forgotten the pain. It was more that I had learned to live with it, to accept it as part of my story without letting it define me. Every day I felt stronger, more sure of who I was. I was no longer the woman who had been lost in the shadows of her husband's empty promises. I was someone entirely different, someone who had learned the power of independence and self-worth. But even as my life settled into this new rhythm, there was something inside me that still couldn't fully let go of the past. I had worked hard to move on, to forgive, to start over, yet there was still that lingering sense of unfinished business, my ex-husband. I had told him I had forgiven him, but did I really? Or was I still holding on to a small piece of the hurt, the betrayal that he had caused me all those months ago? I didn't know if I could ever fully release the weight of those years, the years I had spent believing in him, giving him everything I had, only for him to walk away when I needed him most. And then I began to wonder if I ever truly understood the depth of my own strength until that moment. Until the day he left me, when I was forced to face the harsh reality that the man I had trusted most was never who I thought he was. One afternoon, as I sat in the park reflecting on these thoughts, I saw a familiar figure in the distance. It was him, my ex-husband. I froze for a moment, heart pounding in my chest. After all this time, I hadn't expected to see him again. Not here, not now. He was walking toward me, his face weary, as though he too had aged in the time that had passed. I stood up slowly, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to turn and walk away, but for some reason I didn't. Maybe it was the weight of everything we had been through. Maybe it was the simple curiosity of what he wanted after all this time. "Margaret," he called out, his voice carrying a note of something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe. Can we talk? I hesitated, my heart torn between the years of anger I had felt toward him and the calm, clear-headed woman I had become. I don't think we have anything to say to each other, I replied, my voice steady but not cold. He stopped a few feet away from me, and for a moment, we both just stood there, neither of us moving. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said, his voice quiet, almost pleading. But I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I've spent so many months thinking about what I did, and I regret it. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. I felt the old anger flare up for a second, a tightness in my chest, but it was quickly replaced by something different: indifference. I had already forgiven him in my own way. I had already let go of him, and for the first time I realized I didn't need an apology from him to heal. I've moved on, I said softly, and I'm not angry anymore. I've found my peace, and it doesn't include you. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face as if trying to understand if I meant it, but I knew I did. The anger, the hurt, it was all in the past now. I had healed, not because he had apologized, but because I had decided to move forward on my own terms. Without another word, I turned and began to walk away, leaving him standing there. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't some grand closure. It was simply a decision to keep moving forward with my life without him. That night, as I sat on my couch reflecting on the encounter, I realized how far I had come. I had no need for him in my life anymore. His apology, though sincere, wasn't the key to my healing. The key had always been within me, in my ability to let go, to choose a new path, to choose myself. I wasn't that woman who had been left behind anymore. I was stronger, wiser, and more in control of my own fate, and that was all I needed to feel truly free. As I sat there, alone but content, I knew this was only the beginning of my new life. I had taken the first steps toward healing, toward rebuilding. And this time, I was doing it for me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally home. The days after my meeting with him felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I hadn't realized just how much I had been holding on to until I let go. The past, the memories of all the broken promises, the betrayal, it no longer controlled me. I had spent so many years trying to hold things together, trying to fix something that was never truly mine to fix. But now I understood that the only thing I could truly control was myself, and that was enough. Paul and I continued to spend time together, and I found myself growing more comfortable with him. There were moments when I felt like I was being pulled back into a place of vulnerability, but I knew this time was different. Paul wasn't asking me to be anyone other than who I was. He saw me, flaws, scars, and all, and he accepted me. And that acceptance, that sense of being truly seen, was something I had never experienced in such a pure form before. There were times when I still had doubts, when the fear of getting hurt again would creep up on me. But each time, Paul showed me that trust didn't have to be earned through grand gestures. It was in the little things, the quiet support, the patience, the way he listened without judgment. Slowly, I began to let down my guard, but it wasn't easy. I had spent so much of my life protecting myself, building walls around my heart, that tearing them down felt like a monumental task. But with him, it was different. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to protect myself. I felt safe. One evening, as we sat in the park, talking about everything and nothing, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The world, which had once felt so uncertain, now seemed full of possibilities. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was truly living. For the first time in years, I felt at peace with myself, and it was in that moment that I realized how far I had come. I never thought I could be this happy again, I said, looking at Paul. He smiled at me, a soft, understanding smile that made my heart flutter. "You deserve it," he said quietly. "You've been through so much, and yet here you are, stronger than ever. I'm just glad I get to be a part of your journey." His words felt like a balm to my soul. It wasn't that I needed his validation, but hearing him say it made me realize just how much I had grown. I wasn't defined by my past anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been abandoned, left to pick up the pieces of a broken life. I was the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, who had learned to live for herself, not for anyone else's approval. But as much as I was healing, there was still a part of me that couldn't quite let go of the idea of having a family, of creating something more. I had spent so many years trying to build a life with someone else, and now I wondered what it would be like to create a future of my own without the burden of the past weighing me down. A few weeks later, I decided to take another step forward. I called a real estate agent, looking into properties in a quieter part of town, something with more space, a garden, and a place where I could finally start fresh. It wasn't just about buying a house. It was about building a future that was mine, one that didn't involve the memories of the past. When I went to see the house, I immediately felt a connection to it. It was a small cottage with ivy crawling up the walls and a garden full of wildflowers. It felt peaceful, serene, everything I had been craving. It wasn't a grand home, it wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. It was a symbol of the life I had fought so hard to build. It was a new chapter, a fresh start, and as I walked through the house, I could already see the life I would create within its walls. I bought the house that afternoon, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the future. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I was building something for myself, something I could call my own. When I told Paul about the house, his face lit up. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I can see how much this means to you. It meant everything. It was more than just a home. It was a testament to my strength, to how far I had come. It was the physical manifestation of the journey I had taken, the journey of learning to stand on my own, to let go of the past, and to finally embrace the future." As I sat in my new home that evening, a glass of wine in my hand, I realized that I was no longer defined by my past. I had let go of the anger, the hurt, the feelings of abandonment. I had learned to embrace who I was, to love myself, and to build a life that was mine to create. The road had been long, but it had led me here, and for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was meant to be. As the weeks went by in my new home, I began to settle into a life I never thought I would have. The cottage, with its ivy-clad walls and sunlit rooms, became a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and truly relax. Each morning, I would wake up to the soft sound of birds chirping outside my window, a reminder that I had started fresh, that I was finally living a life that was all mine. Paul continued to be a steady presence in my life. He never rushed me, never asked for anything more than I was ready to give. We spent time together, yes, but there were no expectations, no pressure. We were building something slowly, step by step. And with each passing day, I realized that my life wasn't defined by what had happened before. I was no longer a woman shaped by the mistakes and betrayals of the past. I was someone new, someone who had learned the value of patience, of quiet strength, and of standing on her own 2 feet. The garden outside my house became a reflection of this new phase of my life. I spent hours planting flowers, pruning shrubs, and tending to the small vegetable garden I had started. Each seed I planted felt like an act of hope, an act of faith that I could still create something beautiful. And when the first flowers bloomed in the spring, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that I hadn't felt in years. I had nurtured something from the ground up, and it had flourished. One afternoon, as I was pulling weeds from the garden, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. It wasn't just the house, or the job, or even the new beginnings with Paul. It was about the woman I had become, the woman who could stand on her own, who could thrive without relying on anyone else for validation. I had spent so much of my life thinking that I needed someone else to complete me, to make me whole. But now I understood that the only person I needed to complete me was myself. I thought about my ex-husband, and for the first time I didn't feel anger or sadness. There was a quiet acceptance of what had happened, a recognition that I couldn't change the past no matter how much I wished I could. He had made his choices and I had made mine. We had both moved on in our own ways, and while I didn't wish him ill, I didn't wish for him to be a part of my life anymore. The space between us was the healthiest thing we could have, for both our sakes. One evening, Paul and I sat on the porch of my new home, watching the sun set behind the hills. The air was warm, and the sky was painted with shades of pink and orange. It was peaceful, almost surreal. I had never imagined I could feel so content, so at peace with everything. "I think I'm ready," I said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. Paul turned to look at me, his expression curious. "Ready for what?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Ready for the next step. Ready to live a life that's all mine, without any of the baggage from the past." I paused, feeling the weight of the words as I spoke them out loud. I'm not the same person I was when we first met, and I think I'm finally at a place where I can say I'm truly happy with myself, with my life. Paul smiled softly, his eyes warm with understanding. "You've come a long way," he said, "and I'm glad I get to be here with you." I looked out over the garden, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over me. It wasn't just about having a home or a partner or even a future. It was about having the courage to embrace all of it on my own terms. For so long, I had been afraid of what it meant to truly be alone, to stand up for myself without anyone else's approval. But now I realized that being alone didn't mean being incomplete. It meant having the freedom to choose who I was, who I wanted to be. "I never thought I'd get here," I said quietly. "But I'm finally here, and it feels good." Paul nodded, his hand gently brushing mine. "It's because you took control of your own life. You didn't wait for someone else to fix things for you. You fixed them yourself." It was true. The healing had come not from waiting for someone else to make things right, but from taking those first shaky steps on my own, from realizing that I was worthy of a life built on my own dreams, on my own desires. I had fought so hard to find my strength, and now I was finally living in it. I was no longer afraid of the future because I knew I could face it, no matter what came. For the first time, I felt truly free, not just from my past, but from the fear that had always held me back. And as I sat there with Paul, watching the stars slowly appear in the sky, I realized that this peaceful, quiet life, was everything I had ever needed. A new beginning, a new chapter, and I was finally ready to turn the page. As the months passed in my little cottage, I found myself adjusting to a life I had never imagined possible. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every day felt like a small victory, victories that, once upon a time, I would have dismissed as insignificant. But now I understood their worth. I had spent so many years allowing someone else to define my value, to shape my life according to their needs. Now, I was the one in control. I was the one calling the shots. And that realization was more empowering than anything I had ever experienced before. Paul was still a part of my life, but our relationship had grown into something comfortable, something gentle. He never pressured me. He never asked for more than I was ready to give, and that was exactly what I needed. I didn't need someone to fix me. I didn't need someone to complete me. I just needed someone who would walk beside me in whatever capacity I chose. Paul did just that. He respected my pace, never rushing things, never demanding more than I could give. And in that, I found a kind of peace I had never known. One evening, while we sat together on the porch, I found myself thinking about the future, something I had avoided for so long. The thought of planning ahead, of making long-term decisions, had once terrified me. The idea of depending on someone else, of placing my trust in something that could so easily be taken away, was a risk I wasn't ready to take. But now, as I looked out over the quiet garden, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time, I could think about the future without fear. I could imagine a life filled with possibilities, one where I didn't have to rely on anyone else's promises. I could create the life I wanted, and I didn't need anyone's permission to do it. It was my life, and I was free to shape it however I saw fit. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Paul asked, breaking my thoughts. I turned to him, surprised by the question. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. The future had always seemed like a distant, uncertain thing, but now it didn't feel so intimidating. "I think about it," I said, my voice thoughtful. "But for the first time, I'm not afraid of it. I know I can handle whatever comes my way." Paul nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm glad you feel that way. You've worked hard to get here, Margaret. You fought for this, and you deserve it." I smiled back at him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for being here, for letting me find my way without pushing me." "That's all I've ever wanted," Paul said, his voice soft. "For you to find your peace, your happiness, your way." In that moment, I realized that while I had been searching for happiness in the wrong places for so many years, I had finally found it, not in someone else, but in myself. And that, I understood now, was the most important lesson I could have learned. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I had always been whole. I just needed to believe that. The future, once a source of fear and uncertainty, now felt full of promise. I didn't know exactly what it would look like, but I knew I was ready for it. I was ready to continue building the life I had worked so hard for, to embrace whatever came next with open arms, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. It was on a quiet afternoon in late autumn, as I was sipping tea by the window, that I realized just how far I had come. The warm golden light of the setting sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground, and for a moment I felt as if time itself had slowed down. Everything around me seemed still, peaceful, and in that stillness I felt the full weight of my journey. I had come from a place of deep pain, of broken promises, of lost trust. For so long I had been defined by my relationship with someone else, believing that my worth was tied to what they could give me. But now, as I looked out over my small garden, the vibrant colors of the leaves swirling in the breeze, I realized that my worth was not defined by anyone else. It was defined by me, by the choices I made, by the life I created for myself. The past, though painful, had shaped me into the person I was today. I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet, to let go of the things that no longer served me, and to embrace the future with a heart full of hope. I had discovered that true strength came not from what I could endure, but from what I could overcome. As I sat there, the sound of Paul's laughter drifting in from the garden where he was working, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the love I had found, not in someone else, but in myself. Gratitude for the peace I had discovered, the peace that came from knowing I was enough just as I was. And gratitude for the life I was now living, a life built on my own terms, free from the shackles of the past. Paul came inside and sat down beside me, his hand brushing mine. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. "I'm more than okay," I said, my voice full of quiet certainty. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." We sat there together in the soft light of the evening, and for the first time, I understood the true meaning of peace. It wasn't just about having a home or a partner or a perfect future. It was about knowing that no matter what, I was enough. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally home. The days continued to flow with a quiet rhythm. My life, which once felt like it was in constant turmoil, now felt peaceful and grounded. I no longer woke up with a weight on my shoulders or a pit in my stomach. Each morning, I would walk through my garden, breathing in the fresh air, taking time to appreciate the beauty of the world around me. The past still lingered in my thoughts, but it no longer had the power to control my life. Paul and I had grown even closer, but I had stopped worrying about what our future held. We didn't need to rush or force anything. We were simply enjoying each other's company, finding comfort in the simplicity of our shared moments. I had learned that life didn't need to be complicated to be meaningful. Sometimes the smallest moments, like sharing a quiet dinner or sitting together in silence, were the ones that brought the most joy. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had spent so much of my life searching for happiness outside of myself, but now I understood that happiness came from within. It was about being content with who I was and being at peace with the life I had built. The future still felt uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I knew that whatever came next, I could handle it. I had learned to trust myself, and that was enough. As the seasons changed, so did my sense of self. I had grown into a version of myself I had never known existed, strong, independent, and at peace. The loneliness that once plagued me had transformed into a sense of solitude I now cherished. I had learned to be content on my own, to enjoy my own company, and that was a gift I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The future was still a mystery, but it no longer frightened me. I was no longer a woman defined by her past, by the promises broken and the betrayals endured. I was a woman who had learned to rise from the ashes of her past and build something beautiful. And as I looked out over the garden, I knew that no matter what came next, I would face it with strength, grace, and the unwavering knowledge that I had everything I needed within myself. And for the first time in years, I smiled, knowing that the journey I had embarked on had only just begun.